Okay, thank you for joining me on this video. I just want to let you into a conversation that I'm having right now with Cameron. He's Torah keeping, basically has not read the New Testament very much, if that much at all, but certainly the Old and studying the Old. But now we're talking about Paul and how his writings relate to the Messiah, talking about the Messiah and that he would be honoring a covenant, fulfilling a covenant that was prophesied from the beginning of time at the death of the Messiah there. And so I figured, well, I would just let you in on the conversation in this way. Maybe we can learn from this. You can learn as well, and or at least get another school of thought on this. And same time, I can address Cameron's question. Okay, I'm just going to break into the voice text that he sent me and let you hear it from there, and we'll just take it as we go.
Wasn't okay. So if Jesus had to die and he had to be the sacrifice to sort of redeem and fulfill all the stuff you were discussing, well then it was always going to happen, right? I mean, I understand the Pharisees were like totally corrupt, and the Jews at the time were sort of under this sort of heretical system, and it was, they were sort of, well, they were in control. I mean, it was by birthright and by blood. They were a part of the Kohanim, and they were in charge, right? They ran the temple. They took the all the sacrifices and all that sort of stuff. So, like if they sort of had no choice in the matter, because it was already then predetermined, right? That Jesus had to die. He had to be sacrificed. God had to send him down. I mean, if they would have seen, the error of their ways, like what you were saying in the book of Daniel, well, then none of this would have been fulfilled, or was so. Is there another scenario where Jesus wasn't sacrificed? Jesus didn't die, and then he was just like ascended at the time. Was the boat missed? Did they miss the opportunity for him, and then now he has to come back? Is that what I need to understand? Because if he had to be sacrificed, then he wasn't necessarily like murdered by the Jewish nation. The Jewish nation just fulfilled what God had wanted them and what God intended them to do, right? Like at least the 5 books of Moses are chocked full of people being slow to learn, and I mean that's the whole story of Exodus, is people being outright witness to God and yet rejecting it. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
That's some real good questioning, Cameron. All right, I want to try answer that. It's really deep stuff and so important. Okay, you said Jesus had to die, and that was like predetermined, right? So in a sense, the Jews were not guilty for murdering him because it was already a plan. You said the Father sent the Son down and all of that. Did the Jews miss the boat? Or is there another scenario where, it ends up differently? I guess the question was, it seems like you were saying that if it's predestined, then the Jews weren't really guilty of that murder in a sense, because that was the only way to buy the human race. Okay, let me just start by answering that Jesus didn't have to die. Yeshua didn't have to die, but he chose to. At the point that he said he could call the armies of heaven, just before they nailed him up, that would fight for him. He could have got off the cross and just went back home to his Father, but the human race would have been lost, because then he would never have died the perfect death, and instead of in humanity's place, right? He was to take the place of the sinner that looks for the pardon, looking for the pardon. In other words, the Father can consider, okay, who's coming to me that they want their life ticket, the ticket back to life, get some fruit and live forever from that tree of life, right? How are they going to do all that? So, but it was a system where what the guilty has to die. It's just a law of the universe. Every other world, so the universe is secure, there needs to be law and order, right? So when Adam died, there was no hope. All the human race him and his wife would have died. They were going to die. But that was the plan was devised that, okay, if he could take the place, in other words, what if I die for him? In other words, was proposed to the Father. And then, but that was okay, well, because now at least the penalty was paid. That's the law. If the soul sins, it shall surely die. So a substitute was accepted by the Father reluctantly. I'm sure it was very reluctant that he would accept this plan. I believe the Son was the one that approached the Father. So, so anyways, the point is that he didn't have to die, but he chose to, and in a sense, he had to, maybe because the battle before Earth was even created was roaring in the heavens, and Lucifer, who was a well-loved, trusted angel, but through time, cunningly, he deceived himself, not knowing where he was drifting, all of that. But yeah, he took angels to his side. So the controversy had to have time, because the universe never saw, if Lucifer was to be destroyed on the spot, the universe would never see. They didn't know the sinfulness of sin, or even could believe that Lucifer was wrong at the time, right? So that's why the plan of redemption was necessary. Lucifer's own work would condemn him, and in Christ, Yeshua would win the victory back for the Father and show that the Father actually, his ways were right, and Lucifer had nothing to offer. Okay, so that's the plan of redemption in a nutshell. But so to buy back Adam and his descendants, blood had to be spilled, and that was the Son would spill his blood, the Son of the Most High. It's not that he had to be murdered a violent death. It just so happens that that's the way it happened. And it shows the willingness of the Son to go through such a violent death and still go through with it. It didn't have to be so violent. Do I understand that he only had to live the perfect life and then yet die sinless? Because he had one sin. If he was tempted once, then he would have perished with the human race and never could have ascended back to his Father's throne. So the fact that he did come was to show the way back to the Father, to vindicate the Father's laws and the way, and because Adam lost the way, and his people lost, and the whole Jewish nation had lost the way. So the reason why the sacrifice had came in, the idea of the blood, it was, that was the law that if a soul sins for the good of your neighbor, come on. You kind of disrupt the community of the universe. That's the wise way there was laws. In Torah, there was laws, civil laws, social laws, medical laws, hygienic laws, and all dealing with your neighbor. There were different kinds of laws, right, that would govern the nation. But there was also one law that was a sacrificial ceremonial system that foreshadowed the work of the Messiah, that he would die. It reminded them of the history of the wanderings of the Passover, when they came out of slavery, but all the way back to the garden when Abel was doing sacrifice, Cain and Abel at the altar, right? And he could only learn that from his father, who knew the sinfulness of sin and was and understood what it was to be perfect, um, and have open communion with his Maker, in a sinless position. Wow, what amazing! How amazing that was! So he came as a teacher to show the ways of righteousness and to be that perfect example. But at the same time, when he died a perfect life, he was able to cancel that debt. So if he could live a perfect life on the earth, a sinless life, then life for life, he could cancel that. But even if he was a man, a regular man, you or I, anybody, that blood cannot be accepted in the heavens. Only a divine to cancel a divine law, sin. It would take the Creator himself, right? So the Son, actually, he was creator of our world. Through the Father's power and his scepter, he spoke our world into existence. That's why his divine blood could cancel that debt for humanity. So even though the Father in his wisdom had wrote through the prophets that his Son would be rejected, his Son still came and did everything he could to win the nation over. And so it wasn't like, well, he knew they were going to reject him, so he won't even try. No, he did. He did win some hearts, and there was thousands that were converted after a while. And so the nation as the whole lost their dispensation, right? The nation could have been a light to the world, but instead they rejected him at that point of his death, and from that point forward, that's where he started anew with because he took back the ministry as a high priest, right? He took it back to the heavens to become the high priest that was lent to the Levitical priesthood. But before that, you can see Melchizedek. That I think it was the same dude. Shouldn't call him a dude, but yeah, the mighty one, breaking bread with Abraham, wine and bread with Abraham, right? Kind of reminding him of the covenant. And so yeah, I guess but Abraham, he was righteous because he obeyed. It says in Genesis, I think 27 or somewhere around there, that he was faithful. He was considered faithful because of his obedience, right? So it was always the pure in heart that constituted the faithful. It wasn't so much the nation, but the pure in heart, right? So anyways, I hope that answers your question. That there was some Roman soldiers there that were touched in the heart. People were converted because of the Jewish nation doing what they did, and at the same time, he canceled the debt for humanity. Yeah, and the Jews, they had the temple, they had the oracles, they were the people, and but they didn't realize that when they were offering that sacrifice, and they were charging big monies. People would cross the land and they would bring a sacrifice, or they were poor, they just had a handful of flour or a pigeon. But the priests, the whole nation didn't realize this is the Messiah to die. They lost sight that the Messiah would die like the picture of that lamb. Well, I hope that kind of answers part of your questions. And by all means, keep the correspondence going, because iron sharpens iron, right? We've got to keep learning. Time is of the essence.